Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be discussing the solo dungeon and how you can be successful. Not only that, I'm going to be demonstrating why I think the Cleric class thrives in the Goblin Caves. Okay, so just to begin, there's a lot of classes that you can be successful with inside the Goblin Caves. I mean, Ranger and Fighter, I think, are propped up pretty high on the tier list because they have the option to run a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, which simply is incredible, especially if you include the spear in either of those kits. So, yes, other classes are very good, but there are reasons why I think the Cleric class, as a starter class without any items, does very well. And that's what we're going to be kind of focusing on today. There's also a whole bunch of extra tips on just general map layout and some kind of odd little things that I found. I do have a hidden passage video, so I'm not going to talk about the alternate escape route today. We're going to focus on some of the things that make the Cleric very strong. Alright, so let's quickly go over the perks and skills that I'm using. The most important one by far, and if you're a level 1 Cleric, this is what you should be taking. It reduces all of the incoming damage from poison because it reduces the poison duration, which is huge. And I use Blunt Weapon Mastery, your spells, Smite. I actually take Smite, and we'll talk about it a little bit more coming up, but early damage on the Cleric is difficult to come by, and this is very helpful on a short cooldown. So, Advanced Healer. Yeah, 5 extra HP per lesser heal, which is your forecast of lesser heal on your spells. It adds up to about 20 extra healing per run, which is very helpful, considering you start with an 8 HP bandage. This is like having an extra bandage and a half kind of thing, if you know what I mean. And then reducing all incoming damage. It's probably the most important thing overall with the Cleric class is that they have incredible survivability. This just makes it even better. Okay, so let's talk about spells. The spells I use, and I have seen people talk about Cleanse being useful against the Goblin Mages. However, I don't actually run into too many problems with Goblin Mages because their spell cast is so slow, you can pretty much just dodge left and right. So I don't use Cleanse. That being said, I don't actually use Holy Light a whole lot. I just find it useful for the odd time you're stuck against some type of skeleton in this dungeon. There aren't as many, but there are situations where you may want to do 100 damage to a skeleton. And then, most importantly, I think Divine Strike and Lesser Heal. Lesser Heal, obviously, would be 20 HP with the added perk, so that's a lot of healing. Divine Strike on top, and I'll show you some examples of this. I don't think I have too many examples of Divine Strike damage, but this in combination with your either perk or your ability, Smite, you can do a lot of damage, so that's very helpful, especially if you go Bless, then Divine Strike, and then press your Smite ability. It's actually kind of scary what a fully decked out monk. Why do I say monk? What a fully decked out Cleric would be doing. And the last one I use is Protection, just in case. I usually take Protection Pots, so I don't know, Protection is probably my least used spell. So you could probably replace that with Cleanse if you wanted to, if you really want to cleanse that Goblin Wizard, or Mage, whatever they're called. These other spells, I'm not too convinced to do a whole lot. Most of them are for teams or whatever, and aren't really useful for the solo dungeon. So there you have it. Most important one, Protection from Evil. You could literally have that and be, 10 times better off than most other classes. Alright, so let's look a little bit at what I take into the dungeon. This is just your base setup for a Cleric class. And like I said, if you have Divine Strike and your ability Smite, you can actually do a fair bit of damage with your starter weapon. A lot more than a fighter class or ranger can do with their bows. You just have to get in close. So you, with the starting kit, I think actually have the strongest starting kit for this dungeon. I can't think of any other class that has so much survivability and decent damage. Like, I'm not saying it's amazing, and I'm not saying it's super easy to use, but with the right combination of spells and abilities, you can buff this bad boy up pretty good. So, that being said, I usually take a lot of extra healing if I have the opportunity to do this. You start off with a bandage, which does little to nothing, 8 HP. But just take a couple of 15 HP pots if you're on a budget, and if you have to, take some protection pots. They're a little bit easier to pop than switching to your staff and then using your protection spell. So that's kind of what I tend to do. The thing with gear, I mean, you can deck a guy out with gear and be really tanky, but I found that goblins are so quick that you actually want to keep your movement speed up. So, I mean, running boots and stuff is great, yes, but running heavy equipment isn't really beneficial. If you have, you know, something other than this buckler on top of all this armor, and you're going to get run down by some of those mobs quite quickly. And it's one of those things I have coming up. One of my major tips is sometimes it's best to just take a hit, sprint through a room, but we'll show an example of that here shortly. So this can be very successful, and I've made a lot of money just running basic gear on the Cleric class. So it's definitely possible. Okay, so let's look at a weapon you're going to be using a lot, and that is the Mace. And this is simply by choice for me because I actually prefer it over some of the other options, but so you have to be careful because the Mace actually has a hitbox where you do more damage at the tip or at the end of the Mace. It makes sense, but if you didn't know that, you could be beating people with the shaft, and it does a lot less damage. The other thing to take note of, this is not actually a base level Mace. This is a common. It's not a green or blue or purple, but it's not a base level, so these damage numbers are a little higher than what you should be expecting. So if you look at this, you're getting about 15 damage on top of that 55, so you're hitting, you know, almost 70 damage with a fairly cheap weapon. And if you combine that with Bless and your Divine Strike, I mean, you can hit consistent 70s, 80s with a pretty poor level Mace. So I think it's kind of scary what a Cleric can do with fully buffed up maces or quarterstaffs even. One major downfall you're going to discover is that you're just not very fast. I mean, in this example, you can see this ranger can simply sprint away from me, and I can do nothing to catch him. If someone's hitting you with arrows on top of that, yeah, it's very difficult to catch people. The other side of this is, sometimes it's better to just be very, very quick, because you can sprint through rooms and escape a lot of the problems. As you'll see coming up, I actually just tank the damage. The duration of that poison is so short because of our perks. You can tank a hit from a goblin, get through the other room, and lesser heal. It's sometimes a better option than just trying to fight and duke it out in a room that you have no chance in. So I've actually learned a lot of times to just basically book it, get to the next room, and then once you start to learn the map a little more, you'll start being able to do that a little better because you'll know which rooms to look for. That being said, if you had full gear and you're trying to do this, you're just not going to make it in time, especially with death beetles and stuff. They're incredibly hard to get away from. Okay, so one of the last major things I want to discuss is portals. I think they're actually one of the most frustrating parts for me because it's pretty much out of your control. Everything else you can kind of manage if you know what you're doing, but portals, we'll use this guy as an example, but portals can be tricky. And my biggest tip is try to leave yourself an opportunity, or at least an option, of going up or down floors. This guy takes that option away from himself as soon as he jumps off this edge, and the portal ends up spawning above him. So don't be this guy. Yeah, wait until you absolutely have to, and then move. Because you never know, there's always a very late portal, which you'll see. There's one that comes out super, super late in the window. And the other thing with this kind of solo dungeon is, if you look at the kill feed in these videos, most people are dead. I mean, 7 or 8 of the players are already dead and gone before a lot of the portals start spawning. So you're going to have a portal left, and it's not all that often you're fighting over the last portal. Most people just don't make it that long, which is why the Cleric is so good, because they can survive long enough to find them. Most other classes are dying very early on with their starter kits. Okay, so just 2 last kind of final tips on the dungeon in general. I don't recommend pulling this lever, for one. And lastly, if you ever find the cave troll stairs, there's usually one that has 3 red spotters at the top of it, and they can be really, really hard to get away from, especially being surrounded by skeletons and traps. Just run them to the bottom of the stairs, and then run back up. They actually can't get up the steps, so that should save you a bit of agony. So with all that being said, I appreciate you guys watching. I hope this helps some of you survive, and I love to hear your comments about whether or not you think the Cleric is, you know, one of the best classes for the solo dungeon or not. I personally think it is. Cheers.